At this session of ASH, again we had a number of important trials in the field of lymphomas. I must say that many of the good data had been shown in the spring at the Lugano meeting, the international meeting on malignant lymphoma. But this time I think the two important stories that struck me most are the role of dose-adjusted EPOCH-R in Burkitt Lymphoma and the raising role of CAR T-cells in relapsed and refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. Burkitt lymphoma is a disease that is relatively rare but very aggressive. It is nowadays curable in the majority of cases, but to cure it, the treatments that are usually employed by doctors are extremely aggressive. They are treatments that are usually used to treat patients with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. They need hospitalization, they have a high rate of infections and of side effects, and people are really destroyed after this kind of treatment. Now, in 2013, the National Cancer Institute published on the New England Journal of Medicine a series of 30 cases with Burkitt lymphoma that they treated with dose-adjusted EPOCH-R. And the results were extraordinarily good, like with a 90% cure rate. And nobody really believed it. And we all thought, well, it is selection of cases, it's not going to be true. Now, the NCI repeated the same study in more patients, in 110 patients all over the United States with about different 40 centers that participated, and they were able to confirm this data. So they divided the Burkitt lymphoma patients into two groups, the low risk and the high risk, and the low risk were treated with dose-adjusted EPOCH for 2 cycles, and after 2 cycles patients were evaluated by interim PET. If the PET was negative for these low-risk cases, they would just add 1 more cycle, and so with 3 cycles of treatment, the patients, the great majority, were actually cured. If they were PET positive, they went on with the treatment, and they went up to 6 cycles of dose-adjusted EPOCH, and they also added intrathecal prophylaxis for the CNS relapse. And by doing that, again, the treatment was a little more intensive, but also here, the majority of patients were cured, confirming the data that were published on the New England in 2013. So I think this is practice changing, because now we really have enough data to decide to treat Burkitt lymphoma patients in a much less aggressive way. There was at this ASH a very interesting session, practically all on CAR T-cell treatment. And this is very trendy, and it's also very new, it's also very active. And the 3 studies that were presented practically at the same time are more or less at the same point in development. And they show that CAR T-cells are active particularly in diffuse large B-cell lymphoma patients who are in relapse. So it was also at the same session, a retrospective study was shown on many hundreds of patients relapsing with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And you can see from this data that this is a very bad prognostic group. So these patients usually die. If they get into remission, the remission lasts about 3 months, but the majority don't even get into remission. So we need to find something to do for these patients. Now, CAR T-cells function well. It is kind of a complicated treatment. It is a very expensive treatment, and it is also quite toxic. But I must say, from the first data that were shown up to now, the toxicity has reduced substantially. People have learned how to go on with CAR T-cell, and so the centers that have done that now can show less toxicity. So basically, what they could show is that about half of the patients with relapsed and refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, they respond to the therapy, and about 1/3 of them are still in response at about 6 months. And if they are in response about 6 months, even at longer follow-up, the response persists. So this is very promising. The data are very young, very short follow-up, but this is the most promising treatment we have at the moment for this category of diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in relapse. I think this ASH confirms a trend that has been developing in the last years. showing that chemotherapy itself is not going to make any more progress in the treatment of lymphomas, but the progress will come from biological therapy, from targeted therapies. And in the last year we have heard good data of phase 1 and phase 2 trials, but now these data are being integrated and we can now treat patients with a combination of chemotherapy and targeted and immunotherapy drugs, and these now really can bring us further and we can improve the survival and the quality of life of the patients.